What happens when silence takes over the sky? At 30,000 feet above the Earth, surrounded by nothing but endless blue, a single sound can decide the fate of hundreds. Stay with us as we uncover what it feels like when an aircraft engine fails in midair, and how courage, fear, and hope collide in one unforgettable moment. The Airbus soared steadily, 30,000 feet above a quilt of white clouds. It was a scene of quiet normalcy. In the cabin, trays clinked softly as flight attendants moved gracefully down the aisle, offering coffee refills and warm smiles. A mother tucked a blanket around her sleeping child, while a businessman leaned back with his headphones on, eyes closed, already imagining his next meeting. In the cockpit, the hum of instruments blended with the steady drone of twin engines. Captain Reynolds, a veteran with decades of flying behind him, exchanged a light joke with his first officer, Martinez. Both men carried the calm confidence of professionals in control of their machine. To them, it was just another transatlantic crossing, routine and predictable. It began with a sound, low at first, then sharp, metallic. Like a thunderclap trapped inside the fuselage. A violent shudder rippled through the aircraft. Coffee cups spilled, overhead bins rattled, and heads turned in unison. Captain Reynolds's smile vanished as warning lights flared on the dashboard. The left engine parameters spiked, then dropped to 0. An engine failure. His hands moved instinctively, flipping switches, silencing alarms that screamed in red. In the cabin, oxygen masks swung violently above startled passengers. A wave of gasps, then silence, a silence filled with disbelief. Flight attendant Sarah gripped the galley counter as the plane lurched. Her heart raced, but her training cut through the panic. She steadied herself, scanned the faces around her, and forced her voice into calm authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated and fasten your seatbelts." Her words trembled slightly, but they were enough to anchor panicked eyes. Passengers clutched armrests, whispered prayers, or froze in stunned silence. A child cried, piercing the heavy air. Then came the captain's announcement, calm but firm, carrying a gravity that no one missed. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've experienced an engine failure. We are fully trained for this situation, and we are preparing for a safe landing." His words fell like a fragile bridge between chaos and hope. For a moment, the cabin was suspended between two truths, the fragility of their lives, and the strength of the crew holding it all together. At 30,000 feet, silence had become louder than thunder. Every heartbeat echoed against the thin walls of the aircraft, every glance was a question, will we make it down? The flight was no longer ordinary. It had become a story of survival, and it was only just beginning. The cockpit was no longer a place of calm routine. Warning chimes still echoed in the background, their shrill tones demanding immediate attention. Captain Reynolds reached forward, silencing the master alarm with a practiced flick, but the silence that followed was heavier than the noise. The absence of the left engine's steady hum created a void that every pilot dreaded. First Officer Martinez scanned the instruments with sharp, urgent eyes. "Engine 2's gone, Captain. N1 at 0. No restart response." His voice was steady, but beneath it ran a current of controlled fear. Reynolds nodded, his hand tightening around the yoke. "All right. We're on one engine now." He paused, letting the words sink in, not for his co-pilot, but for himself. 30 years of flying had taught him to respect the fragile line between confidence and catastrophe. "Engine failure, cruise," Martinez said automatically, pulling the laminated checklist from its holder. The words were drilled into them, part of the training that had been rehearsed countless times in simulators. But simulators never replicated the way sweat prickled at the back of the neck, or how dry the mouth became when lives hung in the balance. Step 1, thrust lever, idle. "Confirmed, idle," Reynolds echoed, his hand moving in perfect sync. Step 2, Engine Master Switch, off. Confirmed, off. Each callout was a ritual, a way to reclaim control from chaos. Their voices overlapped with precision, two men locked in rhythm, not just with each other but with the thousands of aviators who had faced this nightmare before. But rituals could not erase the tremor in Reynolds's chest, or the images that flickered across his mind: headlines, investigations, the cold scrutiny of lives weighed against decisions. Outside, the sky stretched endlessly. Clouds rolled beneath the aircraft, soft and inviting, yet merciless if gravity had its way. The right engine carried the full weight of the Airbus now, straining to maintain altitude. Martinez glanced at the fuel gauges, his brow tightening. We can maintain for now, but our margin isn't generous. Nearest diversion airport is, he broke off, eyes darting to the navigation screen. Looks like Shannon. 200 miles west. Reynolds nodded. Plot it. Let's not waste a second. The decision wasn't difficult, the difficulty lay in what it meant. Every mile traveled now carried risk. The remaining engine was their lifeline, their heartbeat. If it faltered, there would be nothing but open ocean beneath them. For the first time in years, Reynolds felt the weight of mortality pressing against his chest. He thought briefly of his family, his wife's smile, the way his son had asked him last week, "Daddy, are planes ever scary to fly?" He had answered without hesitation, "Not for me." Now, that answer echoed in his skull like a cruel reminder. His son believed in his invincibility. His passengers believed in his control. And here he was, one engine away from disaster. He inhaled sharply, forced his thoughts back to the present. A pilot's worst enemy wasn't the failing machine, it was the human mind, drifting into panic. Martinez hesitated, then said quietly, "We should update ATC." "Agreed," Reynolds replied. He pressed the radio button, his voice measured, calm, the voice of command. "Shanwick Control, this is Flight 274, declaring pan. We've lost one engine at flight level 300. Requesting immediate vectors for diversion to Shannon." The reply was crisp but urgent, betraying the controller's awareness of the situation's gravity. "Flight 274, Shanwick. Roger Pan. Vectors direct Shannon. Expect priority landing." Reynolds acknowledged, his voice unshaken. But inside, he felt the hum of adrenaline coursing through his veins. They weren't alone anymore, the invisible hands of air traffic control were guiding them through the storm. Back in the cabin, Sarah, the lead flight attendant, stood near the forward galley, stealing a glance into the cockpit whenever the door cracked open. She could see the tense faces of the pilots, the way their bodies leaned slightly forward, every muscle attuned to the machine. She recognized the signs. The passengers behind her had no such insight. They saw only her face, her calm smile. She became their mirror, their anchor. But when she returned to her jump seat, she allowed herself a single trembling breath, hidden from view. The Airbus shuddered again, turbulence sweeping across the fuselage. The right engine whined, compensating for its fallen twin. The aircraft wasn't designed to be silent, it was designed to roar. Yet now, half of its voice was gone. Martinez's eyes flicked to the engine gauges once more. "So far, she's holding. Temperatures stable. N1 steady." Reynolds gave a small nod. "Good. Let's keep her that way." The two men didn't say what both were thinking: if this one goes, it's over. The cockpit had become a crucible, every second an eternity. The world outside moved at 500 miles per hour, but inside, time slowed to the rhythm of checklists, breaths, and silent prayers. Captain Reynolds looked once more at the endless blue horizon, then back at the trembling needles on his instruments. This was no longer about routine or experience, it was about survival. And survival demanded more than skill. It demanded belief. The hum inside the aircraft was different now. Passengers couldn't name it, but they felt it, the missing vibration, the faint imbalance in the way the fuselage carried itself through the sky. Humans were more perceptive than they knew, silence had a weight, and this silence unsettled them. In the forward galley, Sarah leaned against the counter for a fraction of a second, steadying her breath before she returned to her role. Her training echoed in her mind, calm breeds calm. Fear breeds chaos. She straightened her uniform, forced a warm smile, and stepped into the aisle. Ladies and gentlemen, the captain has informed us of a minor technical issue. Nothing to be alarmed about, but we may be diverting to a nearby airport. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Her voice was steady, professional. But when she turned away, her eyes betrayed what her words could not, the gnawing fear that, minor, was a fragile shield. Row 14, seated Michael, a businessman with salt and pepper hair, tapped his pen against the armrest. He had heard the announcement, but it was the stewardess's eyes that told the truth. Something serious was happening. He glanced at the window, the endless blue stretching beneath him, and imagined the ocean swallowing the plane whole. 2 rows back, a young mother clutched her toddler close, whispering soft lullabies though her voice trembled. The child laughed, unaware of the tension, her innocence cutting through the heaviness like sunlight through storm clouds. Conversations around the cabin grew in hushed tones. Questions passed between strangers. Did you feel that shudder earlier? Was that normal? Do you think we're safe? Each answer was uncertain, each silence louder than words. In the jump seat, Sarah exchanged a glance with her colleague, Lena, a junior flight attendant on her first transatlantic flight. Lena's knuckles were white against the seatbelt strap. Do you think, she started, her voice faltering. Sarah placed a hand over hers. Listen to me. We trust the cockpit. They've trained for this more times than we can imagine. They'll get us down safely. She didn't add what she was truly thinking, if the second engine holds. The intercom crackled again, drawing every pair of eyes upward. Captain Reynolds's voice filled the cabin, smooth, calm, practiced. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We've experienced a failure in one of our engines. The aircraft is designed to fly safely on a single engine, but as a precaution, we'll be diverting to Shannon Airport in Ireland. Our crew is fully prepared, and we ask for your cooperation. Please remain seated, and we'll keep you updated. He spoke with the authority of a man in control. And yet, for those who listened closely, there was a subtle pause before, fully prepared, a crack in the armor that betrayed the gravity of their situation. The announcement rippled through the cabin. Some passengers nodded, reassured. Others gripped their armrests tighter, reassurances bouncing off the walls of their private fears. Near the rear, a boy of about 8 tugged at his father's sleeve. Dad, what happens if the other engine stops too? The father froze, searching for words, his face pale. Finally, he forced a smile. That won't happen, buddy. The pilots are the best there is. You'll see, we'll land soon, just fine. But when the boy looked away, the father closed his eyes and exhaled slowly, as if he had just lied to himself. Minutes stretched like hours. The cabin crew walked the aisles, checking seatbelts, speaking softly, placing reassuring hands on shoulders. Their every movement was deliberate, rehearsed. Yet beneath the choreography was the unmistakable tremor of human vulnerability. Sarah paused at row 21. A passenger, pale and sweating, whispered, "Tell me honestly, are we in danger?" For a heartbeat, Sarah considered the truth. Then, with a smile that reached her lips but not her eyes, she replied, "We're in good hands. The captain has everything under control." She moved on quickly, before her mask cracked. Back in the cockpit, the reality was harsher. The remaining engine carried the entire weight of the aircraft. Every vibration, every shift in sound became a question mark. Reynolds glanced at Martinez. They deserve honesty. But not too much of it. Martinez gave a grim smile. Passengers don't need the whole truth. They need hope. They both knew the equation. Hope, like thrust, was necessary to stay aloft. The cabin settled into uneasy silence. Some prayed. Some pretended to sleep. Others stared at the clouds, each lost in their own reckoning of mortality. And above it all, the aircraft pressed forward, thousands of feet in the air, one heartbeat of an engine keeping 200 souls suspended between heaven and earth. The cabin had grown unnaturally quiet. Even the usual symphony of engines, the steady hum that lulled travelers into a false sense of safety, was reduced now to a single, uneven drone. For the pilots, it was a reminder of what had been lost. For the passengers, it was a haunting soundtrack of fragility. Captain Reynolds studied the fuel gauges, the engine readings, the map glowing on the navigation screen. The Atlantic stretched out below, endless, unforgiving. Ahead, the green coast of Ireland was their sanctuary, but it was still far, still dependent on one engine that bore the weight of every dream, every prayer in the cabin behind them. Martinez broke the silence. If we lose power here, we don't have much glide time. 20 minutes, maybe less. Reynolds nodded, jaw tight. He couldn't afford to voice the thought echoing in both their minds: if the second engine fails, we are no longer pilots. We are passengers, too. He pressed the intercom button. Cabin crew, prepare the passengers for an emergency landing. This is precautionary. Stay calm, stay professional. The words were steady. The silence after them was not. Sarah felt her chest tighten as the order came through her headset. She rose from her jump seat, her voice clear as she began the dreaded instructions passengers had only ever seen in safety videos. Ladies and gentlemen, we will be preparing for an emergency landing. Please listen carefully. Place your seatbacks upright, fasten your seatbelts tight, and follow the crew's instructions at all times. We will demonstrate the brace position shortly. The reaction was immediate. Gasps, hurried whispers, hands gripping armrests. The illusion of routine had been stripped away. Fear spread like smoke. Lena moved down the aisle with trembling hands, showing passengers how to lock belts tighter, how to stow trays, how to secure loose bags. At row 9, a man refused to comply, muttering, "We're doomed anyway." Sarah leaned down, meeting his eyes. "Sir, I need your help right now. Everyone around you is watching. Show them you're strong." The man froze, then reluctantly adjusted his belt. Around him, other passengers followed suit. It wasn't just safety, it was theater, an act of order against the chaos clawing at the edges of their minds. Michael, the businessman in row 14, scribbled something on the back of a receipt from his briefcase. His hands shook as he folded the note and slipped it into his wallet. He had never written a goodbye letter before. Across the aisle, the young mother kissed her daughter's forehead, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. "It's just a game," she said softly. "When Mommy says, you curl up like a ball. Can you do that?" The child giggled and nodded. Further back, the boy who had asked about the second engine clung to his father's arm. This time, his father didn't lie. "I don't know what's going to happen, buddy. But we'll face it together." His voice cracked, but he held his son close. The cabin was no longer filled with strangers. It was a fragile community bound by fear, each story intersecting in the same trembling vessel of steel and hope. "Shannon approach, this is Flight 327, one engine out, declaring emergency." Request vectors for immediate landing. The radio crackled back with calm precision. Flight 327, Shannon approach, roger. You are cleared direct to runway 15. Expect priority handling. Winds light from the west. Emergency services will be standing by. Reynolds exhaled. The words priority handling were both comfort and curse. It meant they were not safe, it meant the world below was preparing for the worst. As the aircraft began its descent, the tone inside shifted. The seatbelt signs glowed like warnings carved into the cabin. Passengers leaned forward, some praying aloud, others gripping the hands of strangers. Sarah's voice came once more, steady as stone, brace for landing. Heads down. Stay down. The demonstration was over. Now came the reality. The nose dipped gently, but every passenger felt it as a plunge. The landscape appeared through broken clouds, patches of green fields, silver rivers, tiny houses scattered like toys. Civilization was close, yet impossibly far. Inside the cockpit, alarms chirped as Reynolds adjusted the throttle, nursing every ounce of thrust from the single engine. Martinez called out altitudes, speeds, approach vectors. Each number was a step closer to Earth, or to eternity. In row 21, the pale passenger who had begged Sarah for honesty closed his eyes. He pressed his palms together, whispering words no one else could hear. In row 8, an elderly couple held hands so tightly their knuckles blanched, their silence louder than screams. And through it all, the crew moved with mechanical calm. Instructions, reassurances, silent nods. They had become both guardians and fellow travelers in the shadow of uncertainty. The runway appeared at last, a gray strip cutting across the Irish countryside. Fire trucks lined its edges, red lights flashing like beacons. The sight drew gasps from passengers, proof of the danger, and of the rescue waiting if they made it down. Reynolds tightened his grip on the yoke. One shot, he muttered. Martinez gave a firm nod. Let's bring them home. The cabin shook as the landing gear lowered. The lone engine strained, its roar echoing through the fuselage like a final heartbeat. Inside, 200 people braced as one, heads bowed, breaths held. Sarah crouched in the jump seat, whispering the words she'd said 100 times in training but never meant so fully, stay strong. We're almost there. The wheels reached for the ground. The runway surged up to meet them. And in that suspended moment, every soul aboard Flight 327 hovered between despair and deliverance, waiting to know if they would live to tell the story of the day the sky itself had tried to hold them captive. The moment the wheels touched the runway, the aircraft shuddered violently, skidding across the tarmac as if reluctant to release its passengers back to Earth. A screech of rubber on asphalt filled the cabin, followed by a jolt that sent hearts into throats. Then, mercifully, the roar began to soften. Inside, silence hung heavier than the noise had. Every head was bowed, braced, unwilling to look. It wasn't until Captain Reynolds called out over the intercom, his voice trembling for the first time, that reality set in. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Shannon. A sob erupted from the middle rows, quickly followed by another, and another. Tears streamed down faces that had moments before been masks of fear. The unthinkable had become the unforgettable, they were alive. Sarah unclipped her harness with shaking fingers, her composure finally cracking as she caught sight of the flashing lights outside. Fire trucks and ambulances sped alongside the slowing jet, their presence both terrifying and comforting. She stood, her voice wavering but clear. Remain seated until the captain turns off the seatbelt sign. The command was futile. Passengers wept openly, some hugging strangers, others fumbling for phones, desperate to tell loved ones they had been given another chance. The young mother clutched her daughter, rocking back and forth as the child laughed, too young to know how close the game had come to ending. In the cockpit, Reynolds and Martinez exchanged a glance that spoke more than words ever could. Sweat soaked their collars, adrenaline still flooding their veins. Martinez whispered, "I didn't think we'd," he couldn't finish. Reynolds only nodded. He didn't need to. When the aircraft finally stopped, the emergency vehicles surrounded it in a protective circle. The doors opened, and a rush of cool Irish air swept inside, a breath of earth itself, carrying the scent of rain and grass. Passengers filed out slowly, some kissing the ground, others collapsing into the arms of waiting responders. Michael, the businessman, clutched his wallet, the folded letter still inside. He would never throw it away. It was proof of the day he faced himself. The boy from row 15 walked hand in hand with his father, his eyes wide. "Dad," he whispered, "does this mean we're safe now?" His father knelt, hugging him tight. "Yes, buddy. We're safe now." This time, it wasn't a lie. Hours later, when the passengers were gathered in the terminal, the enormity of it settled in. They had stepped into the void together, and returned as something more than strangers. Survivors. Sarah sat by a window, watching as mechanics circled the aircraft. Her hands still trembled, but she knew she would fly again. Fear had not broken her, it had revealed her strength. Reynolds, too, knew the truth. His career would go on, but every flight from this day forward would carry the memory of what it meant to be human at 30,000 feet. Not invincible. Not untouchable. But fragile, and yet, enduring. Engine failures are rare, and commercial aviation remains the safest way to travel. But safety statistics mean little when you are strapped into a seat, hearing silence where an engine should roar. For those aboard Flight 327, survival was more than a landing, it was a rebirth. They had stared into the abyss and been carried home on the strength of one engine, one crew, and one unbreakable will to live. And though the world outside would never know their names, they would always remember this truth: the sky can take you to the edges of fear, but sometimes, against all odds, it gives you back to the earth again.